VikesNow, I am Dustin Baker. We're here on roster cut down day. For context, this episode was recorded before roster trim downs, about 5 hours in advance. And the topic is winners and losers from the preseason, which means by the time most of you guys and gals are watching this, you'll be able to tell if the winners and the losers of the preseason designated by me translated to roster spots, which is kind of a nice little check and balance on my opinion here. And then tomorrow, I believe we'll chat with Josh Fry about surprises from the 53-man roster. We already have Myles Gaskin. He was released this morning. And then Jaquelin Roy is on his way out. Last year's fifth rounder will either be traded, which I don't think that'll gain. If it gains any traction, it'll be a conditional seventh rounder, or he'll be released. Neither one of those guys were on my list for winners and losers, but let's jump into it. I will start with losers from the preseason. There aren't many. There are a lot more winners, and that's what happens when you go undefeated in the preseason. Consider this. The Vikings went through a losing streak, almost 5 years. 2019 was the last time they won a preseason game. And then bada bing, this year they went undefeated in the preseason. So the roster might be a little deeper than years past. I think that's the only reasonable explanation, although on the whole, generally speaking, preseason games don't mean shit. All right, losers from the preseason. Let's go through these. Robert Tonyan, he didn't play, so this is kind of a raw deal for him. But you'll recall when he was added to the roster in May and then dazzled at June's minicamp, we were like, all right, this is the guy who will catch passes in the middle of the field when TJ Hawkinson misses the first at least 4 games of the season. That was the working theory, and then the guy has back spasms, and I have him on the outside looking in for my roster cut prediction. Perhaps I'm wrong, but the guy hasn't done much at training camp or didn't play in the preseason. So for a theorized TE1, TE2 to start the season, to be on the roster bubble and perhaps on the way out, to me indicates a loser of the preseason. And again, that's not incredibly fair to him because he was injured, but, it's the club and the tub stuff. The next is, Andre Carter II. Now, this guy had a pretty sweet sack against the Eagles, which turned into a fumble, I believe. But in a suddenly deep edge rusher room, Andre Carter has not stood out most of the summer. And, it's got you, like Bo Richter kind of has. He'll be on the winner list. And it's got you wondering, will Andre Carter make the 53-man roster? Based on the hype and steam we had from him at this time last year, he seemed like a guy who should pivot and eventually make the regular season roster. And that time should be now. But he didn't do much to my naked eye during the preseason except for that sack against the Eagles. And because there is just so many edge rushers, especially if Patrick Jones and Jihad Ward, veterans, make the roster, then that means Andre Carter is probably headed for a practice squad fate. And I just don't think Carter moved the needle enough during the preseason like a counterpart like Bo Richter did. And I put him on the losers list. The last loser before we jump into the winners, rolling right through these, is a newcomer cornerback, Nan Wright. So the Vikings, in early, mid-August, said, you know what, Andrew Booth, it's not working out. You are our second-round pick from the 2022, now infamous draft. We're going to trade you to the Cowboys. We will get a third-rounder from the 2021 draft, same position, named Nan Wright. And most of us were like, all right, sweet, we'll see what this guy's got. He hasn't done anything. And I've even had to look to see if he's on the field. And in this, I don't know if I'd call it a deep cornerback room, but certainly a room that had a lot of guys vying for roster spots. I don't think Nan Wright will make the cut. He seems like a practice squad guy. And he, since becoming a Viking, 2 weeks ago, hasn't done much of anything. And I think he received ample playing time in the preseason, the final preseason game. But to me, he didn't stand off the page. And you have to make a thumbprint on either training camp, which he was in Dallas, or in the preseason to make the roster. So if he ends up being a roster cut or practice squad assignment, I don't think anybody will be too surprised. But until they signed Stephon Gilmore, Wright had a golden opportunity for a team that needed at least one more starting cornerback. All right, so those are the losers, Robert Tonyan, Andre Carter, and Nan Wright, the newcomer. Let's get to a more fun topic, and that is the winners of the preseason. I didn't rank these, by the way. Usually I do, but I did not for today's show. But I will say the individual who unabashedly won the preseason in general for the Vikings was Tristan Jackson, a wide receiver, and you can feel that in your bones. You knew that. The guy was the utmost consistent performer for the Vikings. Now he's the only starting wide receiver in the preseason sake that got consistent playing time to start every game. But he made the most of it, and he scored a touchdown in every single game. I think he ended up with 150-something yards in 3 games while only playing about, quarter and a half, 2 quarters per game. And the key takeaway from Tristan Jackson is that he excelled with all the quarterbacks that threw to him. Remember the good old days when J.J. McCarthy was playing preseason football? Tristan Jackson was his guy. He found chemistry with Jaron Hall, and whom I forget, Nick Mullins, I think, threw him a touchdown pass. So, in my opinion, Tristan Jackson won the Vikings preseason, so much so that he should be designated as WR4, WR5. It looks like, or it feels like the Vikings will keep 6 wide receivers, and Tristan Jackson better make that cut. Otherwise, why the hell do we even have the preseason? If a guy like Tristan Jackson does not make the roster, again, this will probably be moot by the time you're watching this and he makes the roster, why would we even play preseason games? The guy was a savant during the preseason. All right, the next one is Levi Rodriguez for about 4 months since the Vikings found Levi in round 7. He had the Prospect X words attached to his resume, the sweet athletic article written about an unnamed player heading into the draft. They would reveal his identity after the draft. It just so happened the Vikings scooped him in the 7th round. We've been saying this guy looks like he could be pretty good. He's got a pretty sweet motor. He's got really sweet hair. He looks like Vita Vea out there. And Levi Rodriguez has not disappointed. And I have him on the inside of the 53-man roster, and I think he could actually receive playing time this year because, checks notes, the Vikings don't have a lot of big-name defensive tackles after Harrison Phillips. It's just a hodgepodge of guys like Jerry Tillery, maybe Jonah Williams. Jonathan Bullard always finds his way to the roster. But Minnesota needs a space eater, a run stuffer, and, just a guy who kind of come out of nowhere like Levi Rodriguez. So I have him making the active roster in the preseason. He was a tyrant in a good way. And it's really cool that a guy that we identified, the fan base and then writers like myself as, this guy, you watch the tape, he looks like he's pretty good. And even though he went to a small school in Texas, this shit can translate to the NFL. It appears that's happening for Levi Rodriguez. The next is Dwight McLaughlin. So we were all tremendously saddened by Kyrie Jackson's death on July 6th. And, in the wake of that, you start looking around, after a week or two about the cornerback part of the roster, and you're like, we don't have any young guys here to cultivate because, Kyrie Jackson passed away. Well, Dwight McLaughlin was also living on that roster as an undrafted free agent, and he made enough plays during the preseason that he should make this roster. I think the Vikings will keep 6 CBs, cornerbacks, and I think McLaughlin will be a part of it. Now, he ran out of gas on that pick 6. That was a little disheartening. Somebody said, I was on a show, I can't remember if this one or not, that he needs to work on the cardio. But I've said this now a few times on VikesNow. My counterpart in the writing space about the Vikings, Yannick Eckhart, who joins this show about once a month, he claims that Dwight McLaughlin is the best cornerback period on the Vikings roster. Even, moving Stephon Gilmore out of the way or Byron Murphy. So McLaughlin has that upside. I've searched high and low to figure out why he went undrafted, because that's usually why did the other guys not want him? And it doesn't have anything to do with size. It looks like he received a lot of penalties in college. He was a little aggressive. So if you see a flag hit the field, a DPI flag for McLaughlin, remember, you heard it here, that might be the strike against him. But because of his size and because of the youth infusion that this team needs, I think Dwight McLaughlin, I know he had a wonderful preseason, and I think he should make the team, at the very least, hit the practice squad, but even that would be dangerous because some other team would probably roll in and steal him off the practice squad. But this guy feels like he can blossom into the real deal, and he made the plays in the preseason and at training camp. Next, we already have evidence that this was a real winner. I wrote this list last weekend. Was Kene Nwangwu. For years, going on 4 seasons, everybody has asked for the Vikings' fastest player to be utilized on offense because he's the Vikings' fastest player, and speed kills. And then, once or twice a year, they give him a handoff. He looks mid. We're like, oh, that's why he's only special teams. Well, Nwangu, against these backup players for the Raiders, Browns, and Eagles, he looked like a decent RB3. That's all we need the guy to be. We don't need him to take RB1 carries. If something happens to Aaron Jones or Ty Chandler, they'd probably go sign Kareem Hunt or something. But for what Kene Nwangu is, a speed merchant, a speed demon who usually just returns kicks, it would always be cool if they could find a way to intermix that speed on offense. Well, he looked the part against backup players of an RB3. Now, you fast forward to this week, and Mohamed Ibrahim, who was here for, 3 days, he was cut. Dwayne McBride, last year's 7th-round pick, he was waived. And then today, Myles Gaskin was released, although he found his way back to the practice squad profusely last year. Maybe he'll do the same. The running back room has dwindled. It is Aaron Jones, Ty Chandler, and Kene Nwangu. I don't know if you want to call C.J. Ham a running back. But Nwangu proved to the world, as via the preseason, that he is the team's RB3, which is kind of cool. This is a guy who's now been part of the fabric of the Vikings going on 4 seasons. All right, 2 more, and you're going to love them. Bo Richter. I have Richter not quite making the roster cut because Patrick Jones is probably, through veteran incumbency, going to keep that gig. But Bo Richter did enough as an undrafted guy from Air Force, although undersized, that he should be in your memory bank this year and beyond. Now, I would love to be wrong and they cut Patrick Jones and keep Bo Richter. In fact, I'm cheering for that. I just don't think it's going to happen. But Richter was always in on, sacks during the preseason, and he showed that he had the gumption, the motor, and some of that edge swagger to be a part of the Vikings. Maybe not for the long haul, but to be in the orbit for a while. Kind of like Andre Carter is right now. Luigi Villain for a year or so before. Actually, he got cut today by some team. It was the Panthers. But I think Richter could have some staying power, and if you trust preseason football as an indicator of how some of these bench guys do, Richter emphatically passed the test. So give me Richter as a winner of the preseason. He was introduced to fans as a guy who could eventually blossom into something promising. And then the last one. I've been banging the drum on this guy for 2.5, 3 months. I'm probably going to say the name wrong. Forgive me. I know a lot of you commenters get mad about that. But Taki Taimani from the Oregon Ducks. So here's what led me to him thinking, all right, this guy could be a surprise roster make in late August. The Vikings defensive line does not have a lot of large human beings. Well, they're large compared to a lot of yous, and but they don't have a bona fide nose tackle. The closest thing really is Harrison Phillips, and they kind of shove him into that role, and he's not a true nose. But you kind of want somebody, you would think, at least 1 or 2 guys that weigh 320, 330, 300, like Linval Joseph types. And until Taimani joined this roster, they didn't have any. Now, I think Levi Drake Rodriguez now is probably getting close to that threshold, but Taimani, listed on University of Oregon's website at 330 pounds, looks like a nose tackle, and this roster needs one. And then, pleasantly surprising, Taimani did pretty damn well in the preseason, especially that second game against the Browns. His, I don't know if we trust PFF scores in the preseason, but he really tore it up in a good way, Taimani did. And I think just because they need some big-bodied guys and run stuffers, that Taimani has a decent chance of making the 53-man roster, especially after Jaquelin Roy was released today. So he was on my prediction. I looked around subsequently, and some of the other guys and gals that do this in the Viking space, they kept him too. And I was like, oh, I thought I had a hot take. I have it documented back to June as a surprise player who will make the roster. But it'd be really, really kind of outstanding if all of these undrafted guys find their way to the roster or the practice squad. It will prove that Kwesi Adolphus-Mensah might have some hack determined that, you can get a lot of these guys after the draft. Because Lord knows the 2022 draft of his is not looking good one iota besides Ty Chandler and perhaps Ed Ingram. All right, to recap, losers of the preseason, Robert Tonyan, mainly because his depth chart standing fell. Nan Wright, traded for with the Cowboys. What did he do? Nothing. Andre Carter, who had 1 sack, up until then was rather quiet. Those were the losers. The winners are Tristan Jackson, Levi Drake Rodriguez, Dwight McLaughlin, Kene Nwangwu, proving he can be an RB3, alas. Bo Richter, everybody's new favorite unsung, undrafted edge rusher, and Taki Taimani. All right, tomorrow, Josh Fry, I believe, will join us, and we will chat about the surprises that stood off the page of the depth chart release, or the 53-man roster, and we shall go from there. We are only 12 days away from the regular season. Vikings at Giants, a game that has an even pick'em line. There is no favorite right now. It's just an even. So, all right, VikesNow, take it easy.